Hey everybody, coming to you one more time from Germany before I end this vacation I've been on with my family. There's some things happening, even though it's the weekend. I want to bring you up to date, especially on what's actually going on with the Ukraine's advance into Russia. Now, listen, a lot of what you've been hearing on the television and on the Western media seems to keep painting a picture that things are going really good for the Ukraine side, that they've made this big incursion into Russia. It's embarrassed Putin, it's hurting him, etc. And if all you're listening to is the Western media and in the official statements out of our government, you would be excused for thinking that things are going really good for the Ukraine side, and maybe even Russia is just about to start falling apart. That's the way things keep being reported. As I've been telling you a few times that I've had on, as Larry Johnson has mentioned some of the times he's been on while I've been gone, that is nonsense. Wars are fought very differently than battles or individual skirmishes. And it's either something that the senior officials in the United States don't understand, or they're intentionally trying to deceive the American public into thinking things that aren't true, hoping that maybe they'll just change on their own. I can't get into their minds to know why they're doing what they're doing, but I can tell you with a great deal of confidence, very great deal, that the fundamentals that I've been talking about since this war began are still very much in a position at play. The Ukraine side does not have what it takes to launch an invasion into the country of Russia. That should be self-evident. When you get this country that has been invaded, that 18 to 20% of their country is still under foreign occupation, that they have been just relentlessly bombed, and their troops have been killed in large numbers for 2.5 years, and they're struggling mightily even to replace losses, much less to even try to grow. They've been constantly on the pushback. Their offensive in 2023 utterly failed. Their defensive positions in the entirety of 2024 continue to be moved back to the west. That because they launched one operation into the weakest part of the Russian defenses where they did not expect an attack is suddenly going to change the course of the war is irrational. Now, for somebody who's not a military expert, it's understandable if you don't understand that. But for the people who are supposed to know better, retired generals, people in the administration, it's unthinkable. It's undefensible for them to tell you that things are actually going good, that things are actually improving, that the Ukraine side is making progress, that they're actually possibly going to change the course of the war. It's absurd to even suggest that. Just on the surface of it, you can say, okay, a country the size of Russia, with tens of millions more military-age males available for fighting than the Ukraine side has, and of course all their industrial capacity now with military deals from Iran and from North Korea, it stands to reason that no matter what the West is trying to put together, and the West is not even coming close to matching what the Russian side and their allies are producing, that you're suddenly going to get a change in the course of the war because of a very small penetration into Russia in an area where they just didn't expect anything to happen, and that the Ukraine side can't exploit. That's the key thing. But let me show you, in case anybody's unclear, here is what the U.S. media actually is saying. Let me show you what CNN is recording from a retired Army general. Now, I used to be a second in command of a cavalry squadron. That was the last divisional cavalry squadron in the United States Army for the 1st Armored Division. Here's a former 1st Armored Division commander, someone you would think should know a lot more than me because he attained a lot higher rank, and yet he doesn't seem to be tracking with what's actually going on.
The Ukrainians have said they've put 4 Ukrainian brigades, which are smaller, on the other side. They've taken prisoners. They've embarrassed the Russian border patrol and any forces that were in the area. And certainly this tactical operation, which I would call a demonstration, and it could be expanding now, has turned into a strategic embarrassment, not just for Mr. Putin, but for the Russian army. They're not defending their border. So to have this kind of thing occur and for them to have been there now 9 days is certainly contributing to their success from an operational level.
So he's wanting you to believe that because Putin has been embarrassed on a strategic level, not even really sure what embarrassment means in terms of strategy or anything else. Without question, as I've said from the outset, Putin's definitely embarrassed by this. The fact that his troops weren't able to see this coming and prepare for it, that's certainly an embarrassment for him. But that's just a feeling. That's not anything to do with how wars are actually fought. And for then the general to translate that and to say that the Ukraine side is making operational successes is even more puzzling. Doesn't make any sense at all, because you can't get past the issue that Ukraine doesn't have as many men as the Russian side does. They don't have the industrial capacity the Russian side does. They don't have the air defense. They don't have the air power. They don't have the armored vehicles. They don't have the industrial capacity to replace all their losses, much less to make new ones here. So that is what the strategic level is. I'm not sure what page and what book he's talking about there, but that's what strategic level actually means. Those things that go into the fundamentals that national power is created to fight, win, and sustain wars. Those are the things that have no impact by this incursion at all. And I'm going to show you a map in a minute to really reinforce what I'm talking about here. So you can see, even if you don't have any military experience, you can just rationally, logically see how this is like, I don't know, putting a burr under the saddle of a bigger enemy there. It's going to annoy them. It's going to hurt. It's going to be aggravating. It's not going to change anything because the scale is just minute and too small, and none of the fundamental things on the strategic level matter for the Ukraine side. They're just not changed by this. It's just not at all. But now I also want to show you that's what the media is saying. Now, what about the U.S. government? Now, there's an odd statement here from Sabrina Singh, I believe is her first name, a spokesman, senior spokesman for the U.S., the Pentagon, made this an answer to a question in a recent press conference about what the Ukraine side is trying to do. Now, this is a kind of a strange statement to be coming on I think that this was made on the 9th day of the offensive. Watch this.
So we have seen some Russian units be redirected from operations in Ukraine towards the Kursk area. These are just early reports, so I can't really say with certainty the numbers or, their objectives, but we have seen some movement. So right now, what I would say is it's still too early to tell. And we are, the secretary had a call with Minister Umerov yesterday. Throughout the department, we are engaging with the Ukrainians, trying to get a better understanding of their objectives.
Okay, wait. On the 9th day of an operation, you're trying to find out what the Ukrainian objectives are? I mean, does that not sound strange to anybody that the United States, the biggest ally of the Ukraine side, doesn't know 9 days in what they're even trying to accomplish? Now, part of that I understand, because when I look at a map, and I'm going to show you in a minute, it's very unclear what their objective is. What are they trying to accomplish? Do they have some tactical objective they're trying to achieve? Do they want to capture a certain territory? Do they want to capture a certain number of Russian prisoners of war, for example? I've heard that tossed out there as one possibility. Do they want to kill some certain number of Russian troops? Do they want to create a bridgehead into the Russian side that then they can maybe try and negotiate and trade away? Apparently, that latter part is what's starting to come up now, because that's what Sabrina Singh said was the U.S.'s understanding of what the Ukraine side is trying to do. But when you look at the Ukraine side themselves, this is Podolyak, one of the senior advisors, Mikhail Podolyak, one of the absolute closest confidant to President Zelensky. So there doesn't come any more other than Zelensky himself. This is basically the most noteworthy source that you can get in Ukraine. Here's what he wrote on Twitter. Ukraine is not interested in occupying Russian territories. Very strange way to start a tweet. This is obvious because Ukraine is waging an exclusively defensive war strictly within the framework of international law. But if we're talking about potential negotiations, I emphasize potential, we will have to put the Russian forces at the table opposite on our terms. We have absolutely no plans to beg, please sit down to negotiate. Instead, we have proven effective means of coercion. In addition to economic and diplomatic ones, this is also a military tool. We need to inflict significant tactical defeats on Russia. In the Kursk region, we can clearly see, he writes, how the military tool is being used objectively to persuade Russian Federation to enter a fair negotiation process, and goes on from there. But folks, is anybody foolish enough? I'm sorry to be blunt. Is anyone stupid enough to actually believe that the Ukraine side, after 2.5 years of war, can eke out a small piece of territory in one oblast, in one region of Russia, and get a little bit of area there after 10 days, and that the Russian leader is going to suddenly be afraid and say, okay, sure, we'll negotiate on your terms. After all this fighting and after all the things I just told you about on the strategic level that are overwhelmingly and irreversibly in Russia's favor, that they're going to suddenly start wanting to negotiate from a position of weakness. I mean, that's just absurd to say. And yet you have the United States senior spokesman saying we don't even know what their objective is. You have the lead advisor for the Ukrainian president saying this is our strategy, which makes no sense at all and has no possibility of success. And then you have to ask, well, what is really going on here? What is really the operation for the Ukraine side? And it's hard to figure out. It's very unclear what they think they're trying to accomplish, because they're not going to accomplish that. They're not going to cause the Russian side to give in. Now, Podolyak is actually trying to set up a situation to where they're going to withdraw their forces, which is the only thing that makes any sense at this point, because trying to stay there and trying to reinforce it, they've already reported by many reports, both in the Russian and Ukraine side, has said they've sent in as many as 8 additional brigades of infantrymen to try to expand this head. And in fact, Zelensky said, I think 2 or 3 days ago, that they're trying to expand their operation. So they had that initial big push because Russia was completely caught with their pants down. They had no expectation that their border was going to be hit in large numbers. So the Ukraine side for sure did make a legitimate punch into there. But now what? Because the Russians have started to contain this in a shape I'll show you in just a second. But you'll be able to see that Russia basically has it contained already. Now then, that they've slowed down very much, and probably within the next day or two will stop it and start. Then they're going to start to reverse it and squeeze it shut. They may come in from the flanks, and I'll explain that to you why that's important in a minute. They could literally cut them off and not even allow them to return and to escape back, and they could lose all of them. And also, in fact, let me just quit talking. Let me just show you. This is what's going on actually on the front lines right now. Let me show you the current situation on an interactive map that I have. This is from the Institute for the Study of War. And as I've mentioned to you many times, even though I have a lot of problem with their interpretation of events, their maps are actually pretty good and very accurate in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. So that's what I want to show you. So this is just, let me come back out a little bit here so you can see what we're talking about. This is all the area. If you can see my cursor right here, this is the line of contact that we've been fighting for years now, slightly moving to the west over time, especially as the Russian side has been making some progress down in here in this area, and then up here. We'll show you that in just a second. But this area right up in here in the blue thatched area, this is that incursion. Now, by the way, you can see this one right here. This is what the Russians did. I think it was in May or April or May when they operated into the Kursk, the Kharkiv area. And this has been kind of static here. The Ukraine side sent a bunch of reinforcements up into this area to try to knock the Russians out. They never succeeded at doing that. And so now then they've started a new one. And so that's kind of where we are now. And so you see that area is bigger than the Russian side there. It's the blue thatched area is where the Ukraine side has troops at the moment. Now, they don't actually control all this. By most reports I've seen, they have anywhere from 4 to 12,000 troops. It's unclear how many they have. And a lot of these are what's called DRG groups. And a lot of these little fingers you see that are shooting off in these different directions, that's where vehicles and small convoys have penetrated into the Russian area. They've been seen. And so that's what's considered Ukraine held territory. It's not really held. It takes a lot more to hold territory than it does just to get vehicles in there. But the Russian side has been bringing forces in all around this and kind of putting in a hermetically sealed area to try to prevent any further incursions into Russia. And it appears that they're getting some success right there. You see in this area over here to the left, the Ukraine side has apparently tried to bring some more troops over there. They've moved some in that area as well. There's reports that there's more massing over here, so there could be another move in here. I've seen some suggestions that this line basically here, the Ukraine side may launch a new offensive in to try and match up and meet this one. They'll try to fire more into this area here, then try to capture this whole additional area here. That's something that's at least theoretically possible. It depends on how fast the Russians can bring troops down, and we don't know for sure where they are yet. That's still pretty uncertain. The Russians are not reporting that, obviously, as they don't want people to know. But by what we can tell is that there are defensive positions by the Russian sides around these areas here to try to prevent any further escalation. Then we can expect that the military is going to bring more troops in, armored troops, air power, artillery, and rocket forces to start methodically destroying these people until they either reestablish the border or quite possibly continue pushing on into the border and opening a new position here. So you can see they could potentially, like they have in the Kharkiv area, they may try to push even further with that. It's unclear right now. A lot of things are possible. What's not possible is that the Ukraine side is going to turn this into anything in a bigger movement. They just don't have the troops. They don't have the support. They don't have the logistics. They don't have the vehicles. By some reports, 300 to 400, possibly as many as 500 Ukrainian vehicles, military vehicles of various types, have been destroyed so far. They're sending 8 additional brigades, troops that they just don't have anywhere else and that they need elsewhere. And that's the next thing I want to tell you here. So now then, let's go further back down here, and you see into the Donetsk area. There's some areas around here. You've heard me talk about the Kursk area. That's what's going on right here. There's also some down in this other area here in the area of what is it? Lost myself a little bit on this map here. This is the Pokrovsk area. The Russians are now trying to use their troops to come into further here to try and move in some of these areas, to try to push further in some of these areas down here for the purpose of trying to capture a lot of Ukraine troops in some of these cauldrons. And the problem is for the Ukraine side, they don't have enough troops. That's in Vuhledar down there. They don't have enough troops because they put them all up in here to be able to go and to handle all of these areas I'm showing you right here on the map. And so there's, let's see, where we go here. This Novohorlovka. That's another one of the places where Russia is now closing in with some of its troops. And all this is leading, if the Russian side is able to take Pokrovsk here, these areas that you see here that on the map I'm showing here, around these areas are some of the last areas of the fortifications that the Ukraine side has built, going some of them all the way back to 2014. If they're able to break through to this last part here, then there is not a lot left when you're talking about some of the other areas on the interior of the country here, and suddenly then Kramatorsk becomes vulnerable, as well as several other areas to the south, and it's just many things become vulnerable here. It depends on how much firepower the Russians have, how much manpower, how much ability for them to progress further into the country, and it's not likely to be a big move because they also have limitations when it comes to projecting power, but they have more resources, they have more inputs. And so they have a better chance to get that done. And that's what you really need to understand, is that the Ukraine side is almost at their maximum capacity right now. They just don't have much more to go on. And look, you even have the Washington Post. Let me pull that one up for you here while we're, just give me 1 second here. The Washington Post, this is important to understand, because while you have a lot of the Western media just saying, hey, things are going on good, the Washington Post, to its credit, has been talking a lot of the truth about what's been going on here. And this one is also, this is from I believe the 17th, which is, that was earlier today. That's on Saturday. The Washington Post reports that Ukraine and Russia were set to send delegations to Doha this month to negotiate a landmark agreement halting strikes on energy and power infrastructure on both sides. Diplomats and officials familiar with the discussion said in what would have amounted to a partial ceasefire and offered a reprieve for both countries. But the indirect talks with the Qataris serving as mediators and meeting separately with Ukrainian and Russian delegations were derailed by Ukraine's surprise incursions into Russia. So now, again, we have to get back to the situation here. What is the Ukraine's objectives here? What is their plan? What is their strategy? The United States doesn't know. The United States was trying to get this done to a negotiated settlement, anything to get a ceasefire, to have a possibility for a negotiated settlement. You saw Mikhail Podolyak claim this is trying to get to a negotiated settlement on their terms. But you see, they were working with it. They were making diplomatic process, and now then that's destroyed. Now, what is Podolyak? What does Zelensky? What does President Biden? What do they think is going to happen next? If you were trying to make belated progress after all the other starts and stops diplomatically that has happened, going all the way back to December of 2021, what do you think is going to happen now with the latest, what will certainly be viewed on the Russian side as a betrayal and a violation of the diplomatic spirit when you're talking about negotiated settlement with the one hand and then you launch a surprise invasion into Russian territory with the other? Do you think that Russia is going to say, sure, okay, I know we were already talking about a negotiated settlement, but now I'll do one on your terms? I mean, that's the height of stupidity. Again, I'm sorry, there's not a better way to put it. I mean, this is self-destructive view on the side of the Ukrainians. And the United States claims we don't even know what they're doing. Well, that's self-evident because they're saying one thing, they're doing one thing diplomatically, and then they do something very different that has no rational objective. So at some point, the United States, and of course, we're in an election year, so this is probably never going to happen, but one would hope that the current administration is going to finally say enough is enough. You guys are sabotaging your own self and you're making us look bad in the process. So now then we're going to take charge here. We're going to stop giving you anything until you make a start process of a negotiated settlement publicly, until you withdraw your troops back into there. And you better hope that Russia will even allow that to reestablish the border, because right now it's just like, taking a little penknife and sticking a bear who was hibernating in a cave that you snuck in on. He didn't know you were coming in. Well, he's not aware of it. He wasn't paying attention. So yeah, you can punch him with that little penknife, but guess what? It's a bear. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than a penknife to do anything except make him mad. And that's where we are right now. What we don't know at this point is just how much capacity does Russia actually have. If they have what I suspect that they do, then they're probably not going to talk about any negotiated settlement. They're probably not even going to send diplomats to discuss anything. What they're probably going to start doing is that they're going to methodically take that map and that incursion that I showed you, and they're going to start whittling it down and killing everyone in it. And then it seems to me militarily the most likely course is that they'll just continue pushing on. Now, I don't know where all these reserves that they have are by the Ukraine side. They claim that the number is somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 that Russia has combat troops aside from what's on the line of contact. By the end of the year, it could be up to somewhere around 700,000. So it makes sense that the Russian side would now try to take and turn the tables around. And when you have this admission by Podolyak that they're obviously, to use his term, not going to hold this territory, so apparently at some point they're going to start withdrawing based on what he said today. But then you still again have to ask the question, towards what end? Why did you make this incursion if you're then going to turn back and leave it with nothing tangible in your hand except for reportedly a couple thousand Russian soldiers that you have POWs? Okay, that can certainly be used for exchanging POWs, but what does that gain you for the men you lost? Because by many accounts, the Ukraine side has already lost far more than 2,000 killed already. So if you captured 2,000 Russians and you trade them for 2,000 Ukrainians that are in captivity on the Russian side, say it's a 1-for-1, it's a 50-50 deal, you're still going to come out with a net significant loss of men dead, and the ones you got back are not going to be as good as the ones you lost because they've already been in captivity. I mean, I can't believe I have to say this out loud. This is such self-evident stuff. You don't even have to be a military expert to see this. And this is one of the most frustrating things for me. This isn't like, 3D chess kind of thing that you have to have a PhD and 30 years of experience to figure out. I mean, folks, this is stuff you just have to have common sense and ability to do simple math. And that seems to be a real challenge for the people in Kiev and Washington right now. And it just puzzles me because I don't know if they've just lost control of their senses and they think that these things can be done without consequence, because too many things have been in the past. And maybe that's the mentality that they think, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, but ultimately at the end of the day, it won't cost us anything. Senator Graham, who I showed a couple of days ago, and some of our other episodes here with Larry, has just been talking such absurdities of just saying, yeah, well, we learned how our weapons work and we get more weapons contracts. So this is good business for America. Good deal. I don't know. This kind of absurdity, it's insane to think in those kinds of terms, because these things have consequences. Senator Graham, these things have consequences. Singh, Zelensky, Podolyak, President Biden, these things have consequences. And you can only go so far to think that nothing bad is going to happen. I know many in the West are saying, well, Russia hasn't been able to close the gap in 2.5 years because they can't. And I don't know. I have to confess that I have been puzzled with the power that Russia has, why they haven't unleashed it earlier. Maybe they're waiting for something else. Maybe they're getting to a certain level of strength that known only to Putin and his generals. I don't know. Maybe they're very risk averse. It's unclear. But what is clear is that they're not stupid, and that they're not going to have a lot of power and just never use it. That they're going to allow foolish things like what Zelensky is doing here to somehow cause any kind of permanent success for their side. He won't do that. Putin won't. So at some point, these actions are going to have very negative consequences, and then things to take on a life of their own, and it's unclear where this is going to go. But I'm just telling you, and I wanted to make sure everybody's aware that today, this is bad for the Ukraine side. This is bad for the American side, and there is no prospect for this to end good for them. The question is going to be, is it going to be an embarrassment for the Zelensky side and the United States, or is it going to turn into catastrophe? Because as I told you, there in the east, in the Pokrovsk area, in the Chasiv Yar area, in the Toretsk area, Russia's still making progress right now. And because the Ukraine side just sent 8 bloody brigades up into an area that has no tactical significance at all, no strategic significance, now then they don't have them where there is strategic imperatives in the east to try and stop the Russian onslaught. They don't have it. So now that they're going to probably have to withdraw after heavy casualties in the north at some point, probably soon, or lose the whole force. At the same time, they're losing all these folks in the east, and now that they're losing territory, and there's not too much further to go before they could potentially have a break. All of these things are happening on the Ukraine side because of this foolish move in the Kursk area. I know it makes good headlines. I know it makes people feel good in the West, people who don't understand how war works, because look, I've told you from day one that this made no sense ever, and it's going to only end the way it's now playing out, exactly the way it's playing out. It just doesn't make me any kind of a brilliant thinker. It just means that I can just do basic math and understand the basic fundamentals of how war works. And that's just where we are. So we're going to have to keep watching here, see how far this is going to go. Just see how big the cost is for the Ukraine side, how big the cost is for the West, and how far the Russians go. All those things are still at play right now. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to continue to bring you the updates every day to show you the meaning behind the actions that you see, because you deserve to know the truth, and we're going to remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bring it to you no matter what. And I will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.